Hello, everyone. Happy to be back. We have another young Indian with us, part of the Voice of the Young series. Right now, we have with us Arshia Sharma. Let's listen to her. Over to you, Arshia.
First of all, I would like to thank you, sir, for having me over here. I went through your idea of a Vidped. I went through the PDF. I watched some of the videos on YouTube. And in my opinion, it's a pretty splendid idea because there are so many young people out there like me, and they would love to express themselves. So I think you give them a chance to do so. So
Yes.
that's good on your part.
Okay, let's continue.
And another thing, when I started thinking about what I'm going to say in this conversation, it led me into a bit of self introspection. And I found it good because it's not often that you sit around introspecting what I have done till now. So, for today's conversation, I decided I would keep it moderately structured. I'm not going for a very rigid conversation, otherwise, it might become insipid. I would be talking about how I got into this discipline, what has been my experience so far, what were the mistakes that I committed, and what all did I learn or realize. Apart from the academic segment, I will also be talking about my interests, hobbies, and I believe anytime I'm sharing a story about myself, it deserves a mention of my grandfather too. So I will be adding that. So firstly, now I'll start with the much awaited thing. Why economics? I mean, there are so many other interesting fields as well. Uh, so how I got into this particular discipline. So initially, my plan was to become a scientist because when I used to be a kid, my dad used to bring these science in a can and sci-fi stories for me. So I'm like, space sounds something really cool. Why not like go into this field? And it was in ninth when reality hit me. I got introduced to physics, and I realized scoring good in a subject is one thing, but actually having the aptitude for it, being able to comprehend it, is another. And that's when I realized that I might not be a fit. And it so happened that in the same grade, I got introduced to economics as well. And the interesting thing is, in our curriculum, almost every book used to be thick. The thinnest possible book in the curriculum back then was that of economics. It was the thinnest. So, like, even before school was to start, I'm like, okay, I'll start with the thinnest first. And I opened it and I still remember the first chapter. And when I'm going to name it, I'm sure it's going to ring a bell with other students as well. It was the story of Palampur. That's how the curriculum was made.
Yeah, yeah.
So over there, I read this line. It said, economists are social scientists. And that line got me. I'm like, the hope is not gone. I still can be a scientist, a social scientist. So that is how I got into economics. But back then, I did not know it would become so complex later on. The fast forward to today, when I am currently doing my master's, I see it in a very different light than what I used to back then. I mean, of course, it has advanced, but one more thing that I realized is my professors always say most of the economics that happens is actually outside the classroom. And now I have started to realize it is not just limited to the theories, assumptions, or the curve shifts that we talk about. Uh, because what I read in my books, I did find a little bit trouble connecting it with the real world because it was getting abstract for me. It's only when I started uh, research based work in the field that I realized, okay, that's how it gets applied. That is the on field reality of it. And that made me realize that it goes far beyond numbers or like the models that we study. It is so much more. Moreover, another interesting thing about the subject that I find out is how it's so much applicable and the effect that it has is very much traceable and observable. So we often like in my college we often keep Saturdays for discussing any particular topic from an economic lens. And what I have realized now is that there are so many issues around us, be it climate change or whether we should like raise taxes for a certain set of people, or is immigration really that harmful for the economy. Uh, Sometimes a lot of misinformation gets floated around. But what I have realized is that economics is a very powerful tool to kind of speak about this stuff and analyze it in a way which is very much evidence based. For example, I remember reading this book, I read it way back. It was titled Good Economics for Hard Times.
We had an internet glitch, which is over. She was telling us about the book she read. So, Arshia, please tell us.
Yes, sir. So the book was titled Good Economics for Hard Times, and there were a lot of contemporary issues in that book, but one which stuck with me was that of immigration. Reason being, the book very beautifully actually told us about how demand and supply's application to the labor market is a bit different than what we usually do. So the book basically talked how there is this idea that immigration might be a bit fearful because it can drive wages down. However, if we analyze it in a very methodological and scientific manner with data, we realize that it's not the case. I mean, all case studies told that while it might seem counterintuitive, okay, there is one thing that there are more people now applying supply demand, the traditional model, wages should go down. But often, what perspective gets overlooked is that these people who immigrate are also spending in the economy they are working. So, in a way, increasing demand, creating jobs. And in that book, it was actually very beautifully portrayed how there are many other ideas, and dwelling more into the why would make you get a more sense out of it. Now, the reason why I brought this topic in this conversation is I just wanted to highlight that social sciences, they do play a very important role which often gets overlooked. And like their presence is pretty much you can feel it. And there are so many economic principles which we use in designing policy as well.
Okay.
Another thing that since I was just talking about this subject is this concept of well-being that I wish to talk about,
Okay.
because we have a recently discussing how whenever somebody uses the term well-being, the first thing that comes to our mind is okay, put an income parameter to it, put something quantifiable to it, or maybe what is their caloric consumption in a day or something like that. While it is definitely important, we cannot overlook it. However, uh, as a social science, since this concept is so central to us, it becomes important to realize that well being often involves so many other things, like the comforts of family, living a dignified life, feeling fulfilled, the kind of respect you get in a community. And there are so many other things to it which we often do not take into account. So, the reason I brought this up is because I feel rethinking of economic priorities would even like mean rethinking of how we define and what encompasses well-being, because that's very central to the work that is done.
Okay. Let's continue.
And another thing before I move on to the misconceptions that I had about the field was I would just talk about how I love the way economics integrates with other social sciences. Since I had my minors in psychology, I realized if you combine it with psychology, you have this behavioral economics. And if you combine it with finance, you get financial economics. So I love how they are borrowing and learning from each other, all the social sciences together. But yes, now coming on to the part of misconceptions. Uh, a lot of these questions that I'm going to bring up are something that my juniors also ask me all the time. Even my batchmates have a bit misinformation on those lines. And when I started out in my bachelor's, I wish somebody would have sort of cleared this up for me. So I'll do that now. The first thing is many people they confuse finance and economics. They're like, okay, I'm going for an economics degree, so it might help me to enter the field of finance as well. And that's not a very right viewpoint. Reason being, fields might have an overlap, but they are very distinct in their nature. And this comes from my own experience, because when I finished with my bachelor's, I took up a internship as a financial analyst, and I'm like, okay, I'll be able to put that economics in place better. But it was pretty different from the normal academic research that we do. So that was one thing I needed to make clear.
Mm-hmm.
The second point was that a lot of schools they offer economics under humanities. I mean, some do in commerce, but some in humanities as well. And what I have seen is they often lack providing students a combination of mathematics along with it. So students get this viewpoint, okay, we can pursue economics. It does not require that much of quantitative ability. And this creates a problem for many later on. I've seen them when they're actually doing the
Yeah,
coursework.
yeah,
So this was another thing that it's very important that you realize if you are entering this field, please be well versed with your mathematical and quantitative ability. Because I've seen many students and fellow mates still struggling with that. So I thought it was important. And another thing is, given the nature of work these days, it is very important that you feel comfortable with programming languages as well. So the ones that I have come across that we are using a lot is Python, R, and Stata.
yeah.
While I'm still not well versed with Stata, but as far as Python and R are concerned, many students they get intimidated. They're like these fancy programming names, but it is pretty much doable, because what we are taught is basically from an economic perspective. How are we going to analyze the data with the help of this? So it's not told to us in such a core manner as you would, for example, if you're a software programmer. So no need to be scared of that. That's
Mm-hmm.
another thing. So
Okay,
apart from like the misconception part, now I'll go to the other part. I'll wrap up the academic segment now.
okay.
My other part was about my hobbies and interests,
All
which I
right.
was more keen on talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love reading books, and even more, I love writing poetry. And why I thought I would talk about this is because hobbies and interests they play a very important role in keeping you sane. They keep your sanity intact. They help you unwind, recharge, and for me, books I read both of technical nature as well as of non-technical nature. And what I've often seen is when you read fiction, a lot of people are like, "Isn't fiction like polar opposite to reality?" But in my humble opinion, that is not the case. It very much equips you to face the challenges of reality. And I believe a story, it like lives on with the reader,
Mm.
even when the book gets over.
Yeah.
And another thing is that I dedicate about 20 to 25 minutes daily to my art. So either I'll be reading or trying to come up with a theme for my poems. And I think it's good to dedicate some part of your day towards a craft that you actually love. And another thing, since I'm mentioning my hobbies, I guess a lot of interest in it developed because of my grandfather.
Yeah,
He was very keen that my communication skills should be on point.
yeah.
So when I was in KG, he used to bring the local newspaper, and he's like, "You are going to read the headlines for me daily, not articles, but the headlines."
Yeah, yeah,
And back then, my dadu used to have a transistor. I don't know if that device. I do not see it with anybody as of now.
yeah.
It
It's
might
gone.
be an artifact now.
No, nobody
So
has
my
it, but
dadu,
I know what it is.
So
I
the
know.
transistor, he used to tune it into this BBC, and he's like, "You're going to listen to the news and comprehend it for me." Back then, it was very fast. I, of course, could not make sense of it. But now I realize all the habits that my dadu was subtly trying to push me towards did actually play a good role. So
Okay,
I thought I did mention that.
wonderful. I'm so
So
happy.
that was all from my end.
That's all? You have any
Yeah, that was all from my end.
tips for young people? Any tips? Who are in
I
11th and
think,
12th
yes,
and
I
taking
could
some
give a little of them.
Pardon?
Yeah, I think for those who are in 11th and 12th and who even feel the slightest interest towards the subject, it is very important that you, just from the starting, you start exposing yourself to content which sort of economic in nature. I have seen so many goods out there in the market. There is one which describes the basic concepts which we were told in 11th, 12th in a totally comical manner. They just have drawings in that entire book. I don't remember the name. If I do, I'll mention. Or you can read other books like Freakonomics. They bring up the concept of economics in very quirky ways. Something that young people might get attracted to. I also remember reading an article about how the singers or the pop stars can affect local economy when they're having their concerts over there. So maybe bringing up topics like these, they are something that youth really find it themselves attracted to. They don't find it boring or highly academic, so they don't run away from it.
Mhm.
So maybe if like students in 11th and 12th can try finding out that this stuff for themselves. Also, please work on your quantitative ability. That is very important. That is very important. So that is also a sure thing to say. And
Yeah,
apart from it, I believe keep integrating logic and creativity. I mean, do not sacrifice one for the other, both complement each other.
yeah, that's very hard to do, to keep both sides going. It's not
Yes.
easy. How have you done it? Tell me.
So for me, I believe when I read anything which is very academic, that keeps the logical side of it going. And I often try to balance it with my creative side by like putting in a bit of art to it. Or whenever I am say reading about a model. Now academically I've read about it in my book and like everything is on point.
Mm.
One thing I do is I actually go towards the actual research paper if I'm able to find it. The one published at that time, and usually it is available. There are those huge research papers, and I try reading a little bit of the abstract. Being honest, I do not understand it in a single go. And once I even went to my sir, I'm like, sir, I'm feeling dumb because I went through it. It was a paper by, I guess it was by Amrita Sen on the capability approach. And sir is like, I'm glad you could not make it in first go. Had you understood in first go, I would have thought there's some problem with you. So it's okay. You do need multiple readings of it.
Yeah.
So like keep your brain open to other concepts. Like if an economic thinker is putting forward a theory, it might be influenced by the time they were living in. So put like a creative punch or twist to it.
Okay. That's good. All right. And what about your own plans for the future? Have any? Or just going to let it happen?
No, because not really. Like I do have a rough blueprint. Since I feel very inclined towards developmental economics and public policy, I really wish to see myself working there. It would be fulfilling, I know.
Yeah, but what does it mean in terms of a job? Is it the government, private sector, think tank, university? What does it mean?
I think it would be a think tank.
Oh, it would be a think tank. Okay. Yeah. It fits with your way of thinking, I think, and your way of life. Okay. Anything else you want to tell us?
And the other thing would be a big thank you to you because I really loved expressing myself here.
Okay, wonderful. All right, good. So let's end it here today. Let's say bye to the
Yes,
viewers.
sir.
I'll be back with
Bye,
the
everyone.
Okay, I'll be back with another young person or an expert. Bye till then.